Gabriel, a 40-year-old man, carried a mixture of sadness and tenderness in his eyes as he walked through the quiet paths of the cemetery. His visits always had the same destination, a modest but love-filled grave where his wife, Sophia, rested. The couple had enjoyed 10 years of a happy marriage full of companionship until life surprised them with a cruel twist. Sophia was diagnosed with brain cancer. Although there were treatment options, the chances of a cure were minimal, and the process would bring more suffering than relief. With admirable serenity, Sophia chose not to pursue treatment and decided to live her remaining days intensely by Gabriel's side. During the following year, they savored every second. They dined at restaurants, traveled, and shared small everyday adventures, turning each moment into a treasure. But, inevitably, the illness took Sophia's life. 3 years had passed since then, yet Gabriel still maintained the routine of visiting her every weekend. On one of these visits, as he laid flowers on the gravestone and let his tears flow freely, something caught his attention. A few meters away, a young girl of about 16 years old was crying, sitting before a grave. Moved by a mix of curiosity and empathy, Gabriel watched her for a moment. He wondered who had left this young girl so sad, but his thoughts were interrupted when she approached, with timid steps and her gaze fixed on the ground. "Excuse me, sir," said the young girl, in a soft voice. "I'm sorry to bother you, but could you lend me some money, or maybe a rose, to place on my mother's grave?" Surprised by the request, Gabriel looked at the roses he had brought for Sophia and then at the girl before him. Something inside him was deeply moved. "Don't worry," he replied with a gentle smile. "Let's go to the flower shop together, and I'll buy you some roses." The two walked in silence to the flower shop. Gabriel, discreetly, cast curious glances at the young girl, who seemed to carry a burden far too heavy for her age. At the flower shop, as they picked out the roses, the girl introduced herself. "My name is Clara," she said with a shy smile. "Thank you for doing this, it's very kind of you." Gabriel nodded, carefully selecting the most beautiful roses. "And what's your story, Clara?" he asked, encouraging her to share more. Clara let out a sigh filled with memories and sadness. "My mother, Roberta, wasn't very present. She drank a lot and didn't take good care of herself. Even so, I loved her and always tried to take care of her." She paused, as if gathering strength to continue. "One day, she took too long to come home. I was worried, of course, but I never imagined that the next time I'd see her would be at the morgue." Gabriel listened attentively, his heart tightening with every word. After paying for the roses, he silently offered Clara a gesture of support. As they left the flower shop, Clara continued to tell her story. After the funeral, Child Protective Services came. "I'm too young to live alone, and I have no family. They took me to an orphanage." Clara's story deeply moved Gabriel. The loneliness, the pain of losing her mother, and the uncertain future in the orphanage resonated in his heart. "Clara, I'm so sorry for all of this," he said as they walked back to Roberta's grave. "You're very brave for going through all of this." Clara just gave a sad smile, accepting the compliment with a resigned humility. The silence between them on the walk back to the grave was filled with mutual understanding. Though hesitant at first, Clara now seemed to find some comfort in Gabriel's presence, a stranger willing to listen. At some point, Clara broke the silence, her voice still shaky but more steady. "My mother was always very intense. She lived in a way that many would call reckless. She loved parties, drank a lot, and I was always the opposite of her." Gabriel listened with empathy and interest. And how was your relationship? He asked, trying to better understand the dynamic between mother and daughter. Clara sighed, looking up at the cloudy sky. Complicated, she replied. Sometimes, she could be very loving, but at other times, she seemed so distant, lost in her own problems. I tried to take care of her, but it wasn't easy. Trying to imagine the challenges Clara had faced, Gabriel asked, did she acknowledge what you did for her? Clara smiled, but it was a sad smile. When she was sober, she would thank me. She'd say I was the best thing that had ever happened to her. But those moments were rare. Most of the time, she was absent, one way or another. The conversation continued until Gabriel asked, and what happened that night? Clara swallowed hard, recalling the events. She went out drinking with friends, like she often did. But that night, she didn't come home. I stayed up all night, worried. The next morning, the police showed up. The pain in Clara's words was evident, and Gabriel felt the weight of her sorrow. They said she had drunk too much and suffered a fatal fall. It was a shock. I didn't know what to think. Gabriel, with a heavy heart, gently placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, offering silent support. After the funeral, Child Protective Services showed up. I had nowhere to go, so they took me to the orphanage. It's hard, but I try to be strong. My mom always told me I should be strong. When they arrived at Roberta's grave, Clara stopped, and with trembling hands, placed the roses on the weathered headstone. Tears streamed down her face as she knelt, murmuring inaudible words, perhaps a final goodbye, or an unspoken apology. Beside her, Gabriel was overwhelmed with emotion. Clara's story, full of pain and resilience, touched something deep within him. He knew this encounter was not by chance, perhaps it was the beginning of a new path for both of them. After the emotional moment at Roberta's grave, Gabriel and Clara began walking slowly along the cemetery path. The overcast sky mirrored their melancholic mood, with gray clouds covering the horizon. However, something new seemed to be in the air, an unexpected connection was beginning to form between the two. Gabriel, holding the roses they had chosen together, looked at Clara thoughtfully. You mentioned you're living in an orphanage now, right? He asked, trying to understand more about her current situation. Clara confirmed with a hesitant nod. Yes, it's been a month. It's a place, well, I have a roof over my head, but it's not a home, you know. Her voice trembled slightly, revealing the fragility behind her facade of strength. That must be tough, Gabriel said softly, feeling the weight of Clara's reality. Do you have any friends there? Anyone you can rely on? Clara shook her head, a strand of hair falling over her face. No, not really. Most of the kids are younger than me. And the older ones, they have their own problems. They continued walking in silence for a moment, until Gabriel spoke again. Clara, I know we've just met, but I feel like I can help somehow. Would you let me? Clara looked at him, surprised and somewhat cautious. What do you mean? She asked, not expecting such an offer from someone she barely knew. Well, I was thinking, Gabriel began, choosing his words carefully, maybe I could help. Whether it's offering some kind of support or even helping with your situation at the orphanage. I just don't want you to go through all of this alone. Clara's expression was a mix of hope and wariness. Though she wanted to believe in Gabriel's words, her life experiences had taught her to be cautious. I don't know what to say, she murmured, looking away. Why would you do this for me? We barely know each other. Gabriel stopped and turned to face her, his eyes revealing the sincerity he felt. Because I see incredible strength in you, Clara. And after losing my wife, I realized how important it is to be there for others, especially those going through difficult times. Clara gazed at him, her eyes brimming with tears. I really appreciate it, Gabriel. No one has cared like this about me since my mom. She couldn't finish the sentence, choked by emotion. Gabriel stepped closer, placed the roses on the ground, and offered a warm hug, full of comfort and understanding. Clara hesitated for a moment, but then accepted, allowing herself, perhaps for the first time since her mother's death, to feel truly embraced. As they continued walking, a sense of mutual trust began to form between them. Moved by compassion and curiosity, Gabriel decided to deepen the conversation. And at school, do they offer any activities? How has that been for you? Yes, there's a school program and some activities, Clara replied, still speaking softly. But I feel out of place. There was a deep sadness in her words, a sense of not belonging. Gabriel felt a pang in his chest as he thought about how difficult it must be for Clara to adapt to a completely different life after losing her mother. After reflecting for a few moments, he said, "Sometimes life takes us down unexpected paths. And although everything seems dark and uncertain at first, over time, we can find a new direction, a light at the end of the tunnel." Clara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and doubt. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. Gabriel, with conviction, replied, "I do. And I want you to know that, in some way, I'd like to help you find that light." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she gave a faint smile. "Thank you, Gabriel. That means a lot to me, especially right now." As they reached the cemetery gate, Gabriel offered to take her back to the orphanage. On the way, his mind was occupied with finding ways to give Clara new hope, maybe even a fresh start. After dropping her off at the orphanage, Gabriel sank into deep thoughts. Clara's story had touched him in an unexpected way. Driving back home, he reflected on how he could make a difference in the young girl's life. That night, he barely slept, tossing and turning in bed while thinking about Clara. He knew he had the resources and the desire to help her, but he wasn't quite sure how to act. Until an idea began to take shape in his mind. The next day, Gabriel returned to the orphanage and found Clara in the small garden. He greeted her with a warm smile and said, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation yesterday. If you allow me, I would like to do something in honor of your mother." Clara, surprised and curious, asked, "What do you have in mind?" Gabriel, choosing his words carefully, replied, "I noticed that your mother's grave is simple. I would like to offer a new headstone, maybe with a picture of her, so you have a beautiful place to visit her." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Would you really do that?" she murmured, visibly moved. "Of course," Gabriel said gently. "Your mother deserves to be remembered in a special way, and I believe this could also help you find some peace." Clara smiled, sad but grateful. "That would mean a lot to me. Do you have a picture of her that we could use?" Gabriel asked. Clara thought for a moment and replied, "I think so. I'll go get it." She ran inside the orphanage and returned with a slightly worn photo, but full of love. It was an image of Roberta, beaming brightly, showcasing a beauty and vitality that contradicted her tragic end. Gabriel took the photo carefully and commented, "She was very beautiful." Clara, looking over his shoulder, agreed. Yes, she was. Even with all her problems, there were moments when she was truly happy. "I'll take care of everything," Gabriel promised. "I found a good person to make the headstone." Clara looked at him with gratitude. "Thank you, Gabriel. That really means a lot." They said their goodbyes, and Gabriel walked away, feeling a new determination. He was about to do something that would truly make a difference in Clara's life. What he didn't yet know was that this simple gesture was about to reveal a much deeper and surprising connection between them. After saying goodbye to Clara, Gabriel headed to a headstone specialist, holding Roberta's photo. While waiting, he couldn't take his eyes off the image. There was something strangely familiar about that smile that intrigued him, though he couldn't quite understand why at first. Then, like a snap, the truth hit him. He knew Roberta. A flood of old memories rushed into his mind. Years before meeting his late wife, Sophia, Gabriel had been involved with a vibrant and unpredictable woman, Roberta. They met during a tumultuous period in Gabriel's life when he was attending many parties and social events. Roberta, with her adventurous spirit and a certain recklessness, seemed like the perfect partner for that moment. They even lived together for a brief time, but soon their differences became evident. While Gabriel sought stability and focus, Roberta remained trapped in a lifestyle filled with parties and excess. Inevitably, the relationship crumbled, and they each went their separate ways. Sitting in the waiting room, Gabriel felt shaken. He had never known that Roberta had become pregnant, nor of Clara's existence. The impact of this discovery was immense and deeply personal. When he was finally called, he ordered the headstone in a whirlwind of emotions. He knew he would need time to process everything. Driving back, he decided to tell Clara the truth about his past with her mother, but he wasn't sure how to start the conversation. The next day, he returned to the orphanage determined to reveal everything. He found Clara in the same garden where they had talked earlier. "Clara, I need to tell you something important," he began, his voice heavy with seriousness. Clara looked at him, sensing the gravity of the situation. "What happened, Gabriel?" she asked. "It's about your mother, Roberta," he said, taking a deep breath. "I knew her. In fact, we had a relationship, years before I met my wife." Shock washed over Clara. "You knew my mother? What do you mean?" Gabriel then recounted the entire story of his relationship with Roberta, from the time they lived together to the reasons for their separation. Clara listened attentively, still processing the surprise and disbelief of the situation. "I had no idea," Gabriel concluded, with a sorrowful tone. "I never knew about you. If I had known." Visibly shaken, Clara tried to piece together this unexpected revelation. "This is a lot to take in," she murmured, dazed. "I know, it's a shock for both of us," Gabriel said, now feeling an even deeper connection to her. "But I want you to know that nothing has changed. I still want to help you, more than ever." Clara looked at him, with conflicting emotions reflected in her eyes. "I need some time to think about all of this," she said, clearly confused and overwhelmed. Gabriel nodded, understanding. "Of course, Clara. Take all the time you need." He left the orphanage with a restless mind, struggling with the complex feelings that the past had unexpectedly brought to the surface. In the days that followed the revelation, Clara was swept away by an avalanche of thoughts and emotions. The idea that Gabriel, someone who had entered her life by chance, could be linked to her past in such a profound way was difficult to process. She clearly remembered the conversation in which Gabriel revealed his relationship with Roberta and couldn't stop thinking about the implications of this discovery. Meanwhile, Gabriel was also confused and worried. He knew that the information he had shared with Clara could be disturbing, but he felt it was the right thing to do. Moreover, a thought began to haunt him, the possibility, as distant as it might be, that he could be Clara's father. This thought consumed him, day and night, creating a storm of emotions within him. Determined to find answers, Gabriel decided to take action. He visited Clara at the orphanage, bringing along a DNA test. Clara received him with a distant look, still processing the idea that Gabriel might be her father. "Clara, I know this is a lot to take in," Gabriel began, his voice full of empathy, "but I think we need to know the truth. I brought a DNA test. This is the only way we'll be sure." Clara looked at the test kit in Gabriel's hands, feeling a mix of anxiety and curiosity. I want to know too," she said, her voice trembling. "My whole life, I've only had my mother. Knowing that I might have a father is scary, but it's something I need to discover." With this decision made, they conducted the test and sent the samples to the laboratory. The following days were long and filled with apprehension. Clara often found herself lost in thought, reflecting on what having a father could mean in her life. Gabriel, in turn, was also anxious, imagining how the answer could change everything. Finally, the results arrived. Gabriel went to the orphanage and opened the envelope with Clara by his side. His eyes quickly scanned the paper, and then he looked at Clara, his eyes shining with emotion. "Clara, you are my daughter," he said, his voice heavy with joy and surprise. Clara's world seemed to stop for a moment. Tears began to roll down her face as she looked at Gabriel, who was now no longer just a friend, but her father. "Dad!" she whispered, feeling the weight and at the same time the comfort of that word, which felt strange yet incredibly right. They embraced, in a moment of pure connection and emotion. For Clara, this was the discovery of a family she had never imagined having. For Gabriel, it was a second chance, an opportunity to be a father, something he had never expected but welcomed with a full heart. The confirmation of paternity brought a flood of feelings for both. Gabriel, amidst the joy, also felt the weight of responsibility, worried about how he could make up for lost time and provide the best for Clara. For Clara, the revelation brought happiness, surprise, and a little fear, but above all, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. In the following days, they began to grow even closer, building a new relationship marked by a genuine and deep connection. Gabriel started taking the necessary steps to formalize his bond with Clara. Even knowing that, biologically, she was already his daughter, he wanted to ensure that everything was done correctly, providing Clara with the security and affection she deserved. He sought legal guidance to understand the adoption process, determined to do things the right way. Meanwhile, Clara was trying to get used to the idea of having a father. Life in the orphanage, although difficult, was the only reality she knew. The prospect of leaving and living with Gabriel excited her but also scared her. She had many questions about what her new life with him would be like. Would they be able to build a true father-daughter relationship? Would Gabriel understand her? Gabriel visited Clara daily. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and getting to know each other better. He talked about his life before and after Sophia, while Clara shared memories of her mother, her joys, and her sorrows. These moments were valuable, strengthening the bond between them. The adoption process moved quickly due to the special situation they were in. Within a few weeks, everything was ready for Clara to officially move into Gabriel's home. He prepared a room for her, trying to create a welcoming environment, a space where Clara could feel at ease and call it her own. On moving day, Clara felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She said goodbye to her friends at the orphanage, promising to stay in touch. Gabriel was waiting for her with the car, ready to take her to her new home. "Are you ready?" he asked, with an encouraging smile. Clara nodded, although she was visibly nervous. "I'm ready," she said, with determination despite her anxiety. The journey to Gabriel's house was smooth. Clara looked out the window at the landscape, reflecting on how her life had changed in such a short time. When they arrived, Gabriel showed her the house, finishing the tour in the room he had prepared for her. Clara looked around, her eyes shining with emotion. "This is your space," Gabriel said. Clara smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad," she said, and the word "Dad" felt increasingly natural. They hugged, in a moment of happiness and hope. It was the beginning of a new phase for both of them. Clara's arrival marked the start of a new life for Gabriel and his daughter. For Clara, each day was a new discovery, an adventure in the unknown world of having a home and a father. For Gabriel, each day was a chance to rediscover himself, now as a father, building a relationship based on love and trust. In the first few days, Clara began to adjust to the new routine. She was delighted with her room, a space lovingly prepared by Gabriel. He showed her the little things around the house, where the utensils were kept, how the laundry worked, and even the details of the household routine. In the evenings, they had dinner together, talking about their day, sharing stories and laughter. Gabriel did everything he could to make Clara feel comfortable and loved. As the days went by, Clara began to open up more. She talked about her thoughts, fears, and hopes. On weekends, Gabriel took her to explore the city. Together, they visited parks, museums, and even went to the movies. For Clara, everything was new, and she absorbed every experience with enthusiasm. At the local school, Clara gradually adjusted. Gabriel helped her with her homework and always encouraged her to do her best in her studies. He was determined to provide her with all the opportunities she deserved. Their relationship grew stronger every day. They learned together, supported each other, and faced challenges side by side. Clara, who had once felt alone, now found comfort and love in Gabriel's presence. As the months passed, Gabriel's home, which had once been silent and empty, filled with laughter and life. Clara brought color to his existence, and Gabriel guided her with patience and love. On a quiet afternoon, sitting in the garden, Clara looked at him and said, "Dad, I never imagined my life would change so much, and for the better. Thank you for everything." Gabriel smiled, moved, his eyes reflecting the love he felt for her. "Clara, you've brought me something I didn't even know was missing. We are together now, forever." And so, father and daughter shared a moment of perfect harmony, ready to face together the new journeys that life had in store for them.